What if the man who embarrassed you in the most humiliating way turned out to be your new millionaire boss? For Claire Whitman, a 35-year-old secretary in Monterey, a single gust of wind changed everything. One morning, her skirt tore in public, tangled by a stranger's scooter bag. Her angry shout, "Pervert," echoed through the street. Hours later, that same man walked on stage as Graham Hawthorne, the wealthy new CEO who now controlled her future. From that moment, Claire's world became a storm of contradictions. How could she work side by side with a man she had sworn to hate? Why did his carefully hidden tenderness, the way he cared for his orphaned nephew, the way he listened when she spoke, unsettle her so deeply? And when whispers of relocation, betrayal, and lost trust began to rise, would she find the strength to protect her career or her heart? This is not a fairy tale. It's a story of misunderstandings, second chances, and the courage to stay true even when storms hit hardest. If you believe love can begin in the most unexpected places, stay with us. Like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel because the journey of Claire and Graham is just beginning. The morning air along Cannery Row carried the sharp scent of salt and seaweed, the kind of scent that clung to the back of your throat and reminded you that Monterey belonged more to the gulls and the tides than to people. The breeze had been steady since dawn, but as Claire Whitman hurried down the sidewalk, clutching a stack of papers to her chest, it turned into a gust that felt almost mischievous. It caught at her skirt like a hand tugging at fabric, yanking it upward in sudden, humiliating swirls. She pressed one elbow against the stack of reports and reached down with her free hand, fumbling to trap the wayward hem against her legs. Behind her, a couple of tourists sipping coffee chuckled softly, the way strangers do when they witness an accident that is too small to intervene in, but too entertaining to ignore. Claire's cheeks burned. Her shoes slapped against the pavement as she quickened her pace. She was already late again, and she told herself she didn't have the luxury of caring about appearances. Yet that voice was drowned out by the sting of self-consciousness. She had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy blouse and a light skirt that made her feel just professional enough. She hadn't expected to be battling the elements before 9 o'clock. Then, as if the morning wanted to test her even more, a man on an e-scooter appeared at the corner. He leaned forward, earbuds tucked in, eyes focused on the road ahead. A canvas bag swung carelessly from his shoulder. In one split second, the kind of second that reshapes the day, the strap of his bag caught the fragile seam of her skirt. The sound of tearing fabric split the air, sharp as a flag ripping in the wind. Claire froze. For a fraction of a moment, she couldn't believe it had happened. Then the rush of cold air against her thighs told her the truth. The tourists gasped, one of them covering her mouth with her cup. Claire clutched the torn skirt to her hips, mortified. Words spilled out before she could stop them. "Pervert," she shouted, her voice cracking from both rage and embarrassment. The man skidded to a stop, the scooter wheels squealing against the pavement. He turned quickly, ripping out his earbuds. His face was startled, almost apologetic, like someone caught in a storm he hadn't seen coming. He raised his hands slightly, palms open. "I'm sorry. Wait. Please, it was an accident." But Claire was already crouching, trying to collect the papers that had slipped from her arms when the fabric tore. Pages scattered like startled gulls, fluttering across the sidewalk. She grabbed at them with shaking hands, feeling the blood rush to her ears. Her pride screamed louder than the wind. The man bent down, scooping up a few pages that had flown near his feet. He held them out carefully, not daring to step too close. His voice was calm but earnest. "Here, let me—" "No!" Claire snapped, snatching the papers from the ground herself. She avoided his eyes, refusing the gesture. "You've helped enough." He hesitated, still crouched, as if unsure whether to insist or retreat. After a moment, he straightened and stepped back, guilt flickering across his expression. Claire pinned the torn edge of her skirt with a binder clip she pulled from her satchel, her movements stiff and graceless. The improvised fix was clumsy, but it was better than nothing. She could feel the tourist's eyes on her like hot coals. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out, grateful for the distraction. A company-wide notification glowed on the screen. All staff, please gather in the main auditorium at 10:00 a.m. for the introduction of our new chairman and interim CEO. Claire exhaled slowly. The timing couldn't be worse. Of all mornings to humiliate herself in public, it had to be the morning of the leadership announcement. She thought about the faces she'd have to walk past, the whispers she might overhear. She forced herself to breathe, to fold the papers neatly back into her arms, to keep walking. "You're fine," she whispered under her breath. "You're fine. Just make it to the office. No one will remember this in an hour." But her words didn't reach the part of her heart that still trembled. Every step felt heavy with humiliation. Behind her, the man still stood by his scooter. He wasn't smirking, wasn't mocking her. He looked almost stunned, as though he hadn't yet figured out how a simple ride to wherever he was going had turned into this public disaster. Claire caught his reflection in the glass window of a souvenir shop, tall, shoulders squared under a tailored jacket, hair just messy enough to look careless rather than unkempt. For a second, his gaze lingered on her retreating form, his mouth set in a line of regret. She turned away quickly. She didn't want to read anything more in that look, not apology, not curiosity, not whatever it might have been. Her pride was already sore, and she had no intention of letting a stranger complicate it further. Pulling her bag higher on her shoulder, Claire marched toward the MCC building, binder clip biting awkwardly at the fabric of her skirt. Her pulse still hammered with the word she had shouted. Pervert! It echoed in her ears, far louder than it had sounded in real life, as though she had branded him with it forever. She prayed silently, almost desperately. Let this be the last time I ever see that man. But deep down, in some quiet corner of her gut, she had a strange, uneasy sense that the world wasn't finished weaving their paths together. The auditorium of the Monterey Coast Conservancy smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. The lights from the projectors flickered against the pale walls, filling the room with a sterile brightness that seemed to exaggerate every wrinkle in the seats and every nervous twitch of the employees waiting inside. Claire Whitman sat in the very last row, her back pressed tight against the chair, her skirt pinned together with a binder clip that dug into her waist whenever she shifted. She kept her head low, praying that no one noticed. She had patched herself up well enough to survive the morning, but shame still buzzed under her skin. The echo of her own voice, Pervert, lingered in her mind like an embarrassing stain that refused to wash out. At the front of the room, a podium gleamed under the harsh lights. A man from the communications team tapped the microphone, reminding everyone to settle. The murmur of conversation quieted into expectant silence. "Good morning, everyone," the moderator said with a forced smile. "Today marks a new chapter for the Conservancy. As you all know, the board has appointed an interim chairman and CEO to guide us through this transition." Claire felt her chest tighten. She adjusted the papers in her lap, as if their edges might anchor her to reality. "Please join me in welcoming Mr. Graham Hawthorne." The name struck her ears like a bell. She barely processed it before the doors opened at the side of the stage. He walked in with a steady stride, tall and composed, his dark suit tailored to perfection. His hair, slightly tousled by the same Monterey wind that had ruined her morning, caught the light as if it belonged in an advertisement. And his face, Claire's heart dropped. It was him, the man on the scooter, the one who had ripped her skirt, the one she had branded with that terrible word. The room erupted in polite applause. Claire's hands stayed frozen on her lap. Every nerve in her body seemed to light up at once. The humiliation from earlier slammed back into her chest, heavier than before. Of all men in the city, of all coincidences cruel enough to exist, he had to be the one standing at the podium now. Graham Hawthorne's voice carried across the room, warm but steady. "Thank you. I know transitions are never easy. Many of you have questions, and I'll do my best to answer them." His words were measured, practiced, the cadence of someone who had addressed crowds many times before. Yet Claire couldn't hear much beyond the ringing in her ears. She stared at her knees, trying to breathe evenly, while whispers fluttered around her. "Isn't he the tech millionaire who sold his startup?" Someone behind her whispered. "Didn't he used to date Elena Carlisle?" Another voice added, lower but sharper. Claire's stomach knotted tighter. She knew Elena's name well. Elena Carlisle wasn't just any woman, she was a board member, sophisticated, polished, and well-connected. Rumor had it she and Graham had once been engaged. If those rumors were true, then their history would surely echo in every decision made at MCC. Claire forced her eyes toward the stage, though part of her wanted to flee. Graham's slides flashed on the screen, financial charts, numbers sliding downward, notes about operational deficits. "We're facing challenges," he admitted. "The budget is in the red. Our programs are at risk. To stabilize, we will need to make difficult choices. That may mean restructuring staff. It may also mean evaluating whether our headquarters should remain here in Monterey." The words hit like cold rain. Around the room, shoulders tensed, eyes narrowed, pens scratched nervously against notepads. Claire's throat tightened. The possibility of relocation or layoffs meant uncertainty for everyone, including her. She thought of her small apartment, of her aging Aunt May who depended on her visits, of the fragile stability she had built here in Monterey. Could all of it vanish with one man's decision? Her resentment doubled. How dare he stand there, the man who had humiliated her on the sidewalk, now speaking with such authority about the fate of her livelihood, and yet, against her will. She felt something else stir inside her curiosity. His tone wasn't cruel, not even detached. There was a weight in his words, as though he carried the burden personally. Graham paused, scanning the room. His eyes swept the crowd, row by row, until they landed on her. For a suspended moment, the auditorium seemed to fade away. Claire's breath caught as his gaze locked with hers. It wasn't smug, wasn't amused. If anything, it was soft, almost apologetic. His head tilted the smallest fraction, a subtle nod, as though to say, "I'm sorry." Her chest burned with conflicting emotions. But she couldn't allow it, not here, not after everything. She tore her eyes away, fixing them on the floor. He continued speaking, his voice regaining its firm rhythm. Claire barely heard the rest. All she could feel was the heat on her cheeks and the awareness that her world had just shifted again. When the presentation ended, the room filled with polite applause once more. Claire clapped slowly, her palms dry, her mind already racing. She gathered her bag, clutching it tight as though it could shield her from further humiliation. As people stood and whispered to one another, the uncertainty in the air thickened. Jobs were at risk. The future was unclear. And standing at the center of it all was Graham Hawthorne, a man tied not only to the Conservancy's survival, but also to her most humiliating moment. She whispered under her breath, her words lost in the rustle of the crowd. This can't be real. But it was real, and it was only the beginning. The morning after the auditorium announcement, Claire arrived at the office a little earlier than usual. The binder clip still held the seam of her skirt together, though she had promised herself she would sew it properly tonight. She thought keeping her head down would help her survive the week, but an email flashing across her screen destroyed that hope before 9 o'clock. Executive assistant out on medical leave. Effective immediately. Claire Whitman will support the interim CEO until coverage is arranged. Her stomach sank. Of all people, why her? She had been praying for invisibility, and now she was being shoved into the spotlight worse, into the chair beside the very man who had torn her skirt in public. She gathered her things slowly, as if moving carefully enough might change the words on the screen. When she stepped into the CEO's corner office, she expected a clutter of luxury. Instead, the room startled her with its emptiness. The desk stretched wide and polished, nearly bare. At one end sat a small glass globe, the kind sold in museum gift shops, and beside it a compact coffee machine with a stack of plain white mugs. That was all. No family photos, no scattered notes, no decorations hinting at personality. It was like stepping into a hotel room where the guest hadn't unpacked. Graham Hawthorne stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, gaze on the gray Pacific rolling beyond Cannery Row. His voice was clipped, efficient. He ended the call quickly and turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Looks like we'll be sharing space for a while," he said. Claire forced a polite nod. "That's what the email says." He gestured toward the chair across from his. "Please, make yourself at home." She sat, though nothing about the situation felt like home. She pulled out her laptop, set up her planner, and began to sort through the mountain of scheduling requests that had piled up since his arrival. He worked at a pace that made her head spin. Short emails, abrupt decisions, calls stacked back to back with barely a pause for water. At first, their styles clashed. Claire believed in clarity, in detailed notes and color-coded reminders that prevented mistakes. Graham wanted speed, moving from one matter to the next without looking back. When she asked for context, he waved a hand and said, "We'll adjust later." When she pressed for specifics, he frowned as if she were slowing him down. By mid-morning, the tension thickened. She handed him a schedule draft with explanations. He skimmed it in seconds and said, "Condense this." She bit her lip, resisting the urge to snap back. But then small accidents broke through the frost. At one point, Graham poured himself coffee from the sleek little machine on his desk. He took a sip, grimaced, and muttered under his breath. Claire tried not to laugh, but the face he made was too much. A chuckle escaped. "It's terrible, isn't it?" she said, unable to hold back. "Like drinking burnt water," he admitted, setting the mug aside. Later, she was repairing a torn folder with clear tape, her fingers fumbling to smooth the wrinkles. He passed by, glanced down, and raised a brow. "That's your solution. Cheaper than buying new ones," she replied. Then, after a pause, added, "Besides, it works." His lips twitched in the faintest smile, and for a moment the office felt less like a battlefield. Gradually, Graham began to notice her competence. She didn't just type notes, she streamlined conflicting meetings, flagged inconsistencies in reports, and rerouted calls so smoothly that he barely noticed interruptions anymore. By late afternoon, when he asked for a budget summary, she already had it highlighted and annotated. He looked at her across the desk, his expression softer than before. "You know this place better than anyone," he said quietly. She wasn't sure whether it was a compliment or an observation, but it warmed her nonetheless. Maybe he wasn't the arrogant tyrant she had painted in her head. Then came the moment that unsettled her most. They were reviewing the annual budget together, scanning line after line of numbers projected on the wall. Graham moved quickly, flipping through slides until his hand froze on the trackpad. His jaw tightened. Claire followed his gaze. It had landed on a line item for children's educational programs initiatives that brought local school groups to the aquarium, teaching them about ocean conservation. The funding had been halved, for the first time all day. His voice faltered. "Who cut this?" Claire hesitated. "The board recommended adjustments last quarter." Attendance numbers dropped. He stared at the figure as though it were a personal wound. His eyes softened, distant, almost pained. She caught something in his face, an emotion that didn't match the cold efficiency he had shown all day. Regret. The silence stretched long enough that Claire felt compelled to speak. "We could propose a pilot program, maybe rebuild the attendance numbers. It isn't beyond saving." He nodded slowly, but the weight in his gaze lingered. Something about that line item mattered to him, more than budgets or optics. When the review ended, he closed his laptop quietly, without another word. Claire watched him, her curiosity piqued in spite of herself. Behind the tailored suit and quick decisions, who was this man? That question echoed in her mind as she packed up her things. She had walked into the office expecting only friction. Instead, she had glimpsed something human, something softer than she had imagined, and that, perhaps, unsettled her most of all. The Monterey Bay Aquarium always carried a hush, even when filled with children pressing their noses to glass. The sound of water filtered through the halls, steady and calming, like the heartbeat of the ocean itself. Claire had come on her lunch break, hoping to steal a quiet hour among the jellyfish and the soft light of the kelp forest. She needed distance from spreadsheets and the sharp edges of the office. As she moved past a tank where seahorses clung to swaying strands, she caught sight of a tall figure. Her steps slowed. There, standing with a boy who couldn't have been more than 12, was Graham Hawthorne. The boy clutched a sketchbook against his chest, pencil poised as though ready to capture every curve of the tiny creatures. His face was intent, absorbed in the way the seahorses bent and swayed. Graham leaned down, speaking quietly, pointing out the details, their tails wrapping around the grass, the way they moved in pairs. His voice, usually clipped and businesslike, was patient, gentle. Claire paused, hidden by the glow of the tank, and watched. Something about the scene tugged at her chest. She didn't want to intrude, but the boy noticed her first. He looked up with bright eyes, then nudged Graham. Graham turned, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something softer. "Claire," he said, his tone less formal than it had been in the office. "This is my nephew, Nick." Nick offered a shy smile, holding out the sketchbook. "I like drawing them. They look like they're dancing." Claire's lips curved despite herself. "They do. And you're very talented." Nick's ears flushed pink. He turned back to the tank, sketching again with quick strokes. Graham rested a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder, steady but unobtrusive. "He's been staying with me," Graham explained quietly. "His parents passed away last year. I'm his guardian now." The words landed heavy, yet Graham spoke them without dramatics. Still. Claire heard the weight behind them. She glanced at Nick, absorbed in his drawing, and felt her chest tighten. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must be a lot to carry." Graham's eyes flickered, shadows crossing beneath his calm exterior. "It is. Some days I feel like I'm learning a new language with no dictionary. He deserves stability, and I'm still figuring out how to give him that." They walked slowly toward the next exhibit, Nick skipping ahead just enough to stay within sight. The hall smelled faintly of brine, the glass glowing blue against their faces. Claire found herself speaking without thinking. "I take care of my aunt, May. She raised me after my parents divorced. She's 70 now, and her memory slips more than I want to admit. Some mornings she doesn't remember what day it is. Sometimes she doesn't remember me." Her throat tightened, but she went on. "I keep telling myself I can fix it if I try hard enough. Cook her meals, label the cabinets, write notes for her bedside, but memory doesn't work that way." They paused before the kelp forest tank, sunlight streaming down through the swaying stalks. Nick pressed his face against the glass, rapt as a leopard shark glided past. Graham's voice was quiet. "You try anyway." Claire nodded. "Because it matters. Even if it doesn't last, it matters in the moment." For a stretch of silence, they simply stood there, listening to the hum of the water pumps, watching schools of fish scatter and regroup. Something unspoken hung between them, not the tension of the office, but a thread of shared understanding. Then Graham spoke again, more softly still. "There are nights when I lie awake, wondering if I'm failing him, if love is enough to replace what he's lost. Some things can't be fixed with money or plans. I'm good at formulas, but there's no formula for grief." Claire turned to him, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his words, his suit, his measured voice, the power he carried in meetings. Those things had seemed like armor. But here, beside a boy with a sketchbook, he was only a man trying to hold together something fragile. Her judgment of him, built on that first disastrous morning, cracked. She saw him now through another lens, not just as the stranger who had embarrassed her, not just as the boss who threatened her stability, but as someone carrying his own unspoken fears. Nick ran up to them, holding out his drawing. "Do you want to see?" Graham smiled and nodded, his hand brushing Nick's hair back. Claire looked down at the sketch awkward lines. "Yes, but also energy, movement, life. It's wonderful," she told him, and meant it. Nick beamed, then darted off toward the tide pool exhibit. They followed more slowly, their steps measured, Claire glanced at Graham and found him watching Nick with an expression so tender it startled her. It was a look of love, unshielded, stripped of calculation. And in that moment, Claire's own heart shifted. She no longer saw just the CEO in a suit. She saw the guardian, the uncle, the man who whispered to seahorses for a boy who had lost too much too soon. She felt her own defenses soften, and that scared her, too. The Monterey Bay Aquarium glowed like a lantern that night. Blue light shimmered through the tall glass tanks, casting ripples across the polished floor. Guests moved in elegant clusters, their voices hushed and reverent, as though the fish circling above demanded a quieter kind of celebration. Claire Whitman stepped through the entrance, tugging lightly at the hem of her modest dress. It was a pale shade of gray, one she had chosen for its simplicity. She had told herself it didn't matter what she wore, that she was here to take notes, to smile politely, to disappear into the crowd, but her heart thumped hard against her ribs. Every step made her acutely aware of how little she belonged among gowns that glittered like constellations. Servers carried trays of champagne flutes, their glass stems clinking faintly as they passed. The scent of polished wood mingled with salt water and perfume. Claire steadied her breath, reminding herself to keep her shoulders straight, to move with purpose. She had survived worse mornings. Surely she could survive one evening of polite society. The crowd swelled near the central tank, where a small stage had been set up for speeches. Board members mingled with local officials, donors with eager smiles, reporters with pens ready. The air was heavy with expectation, as if something more than conservation funding was at stake. Then came the subtle shift, the kind of shift Claire had begun to recognize in office corridors. Heads turned, conversations hushed. A collective glance swept across the room. Elena Carlisle had arrived. Her gown shimmered emerald under the aquarium lights, clinging perfectly to a frame that radiated confidence. Her hair was pulled into a sleek knot, not a strand out of place. She moved with the certainty of someone who knew eyes followed her and welcomed it. When she reached the front, she placed a manicured hand lightly on Graham Hawthorne's arm. Claire's stomach clenched. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. The two of them together made sense. Graham, the polished tech millionaire turned philanthropist. Elena, the poised board member with connections stretching from San Francisco to D.C. Rumors had swirled for years about their past rumors of an engagement, of plans abandoned. Seeing them now, side by side, it was easy to believe every whispered word. Graham leaned slightly toward Elena as she spoke, his expression attentive. Claire was too far to hear their words, but Elena's laugh carried a soft, practiced sound that drew eyes toward her. Claire noticed how easily Graham allowed the contact, how natural it looked when Elena's hand lingered on his sleeve. The sensation in Claire's chest was strange, a twist of jealousy she didn't want to admit. She told herself it was only professional concern that Elena's influence could tilt decisions that affected everyone at MCC. But the truth gnawed deeper. She remembered Graham's quiet voice at the aquarium, the way he spoke to Nick with patience, the way he had listened when she confessed her fears about Aunt May. Those moments had felt private, fragile, real. Now they seemed disposable under the harsh glow of cameras. The evening continued with speeches and polite applause. Graham took the stage, his tone steady, his words carefully chosen. He spoke of the ocean, of responsibility, of the need for courage in hard times. Claire listened, but her eyes kept drifting to where Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him with a small, knowing smile. And then came the spark that lit the room into whispers. A reporter near the stage asked about the future of the Conservancy. Graham responded in measured tones, but someone's phone camera caught a moment when Elena leaned in, murmuring near his ear. His reply, short, almost careless, was recorded. The microphone just barely picking it up. The move has already been discussed. Within minutes. The clip was online. Phones buzzed across the hall. Staff exchanged glances. The phrase spread like wildfire. The move has already been discussed. Claire's pulse pounded. Relocation, confirmation. Whether it was a slip or not, the words felt like betrayal. Around her, colleagues whispered, their faces drawn. So, it's true, San Francisco. What happens to our jobs? The undercurrent of panic rippled through the gala, unspoken yet unmistakable. Claire stood rooted, her glass of water trembling in her hand. The Graham she had glimpsed earlier in quiet moments. The guardian, the man with shadows in his eyes, was replaced by this polished figure beside Elena, his words fueling uncertainty, his presence reinforcing every fear. She wanted to believe the kindness she had seen was real. She wanted to trust the man who had once softened at the mention of children's programs, but the image before her made that faith falter. She drifted away from the stage, needing air. Her steps carried her to the edge of a vast tank, where a school of silver fish moved like liquid light. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, staring into the shifting blue. Her reflection stared back, pale and uncertain, layered over the endless sea. Behind her, laughter and conversation rose again, but it sounded hollow. The gala sparkled on, yet all she felt was the quiet ache of doubt. Claire whispered to herself, though no one could hear, "What am I supposed to believe?" And for the first time since she had met Graham Hawthorne, she wasn't sure she had an answer. The next morning, the halls of Monterey Coast Conservancy carried a strange silence. It wasn't the usual hum of staff rushing between meetings, the soft chatter near the coffee pot, or the shuffle of folders changing hands. It was thinner than that, like a tide pulled back too far, leaving behind a stretch of damp sand. Claire Whitman walked in at 8 sharp. She placed her bag neatly under her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing. Her keystrokes were measured, each email phrased exactly as policy required. No warmth, no unnecessary detail, just the minimum, the professional. She felt her chest tighten with each message sent. It wasn't anger that pressed against her ribs, it was disappointment. A disappointment that curled into itself. Quiet. Cold. Across the building, Graham Hawthorne tried to find the right moment. He arrived earlier than usual, his tie knotted without thought, his eyes scanning for a chance to bridge the gap. Yet every time he passed her desk, Claire's gaze stayed fixed on the screen, her shoulders square, her posture unyielding. He thought about stopping, about asking if they could talk, but her clipped tone when she answered, "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne, or I'll update the schedule," froze him in place. The Conservancy was buzzing beneath the silence. CFO Mark Ellis pressed hard in meetings, warning of deficits, insisting on cuts. He dropped hints about strategic relocations, stirring more fear. Staff traded rumors by the copier. "They're closing us down. San Francisco is already chosen." Why else would Elena be around again? The tension wrapped itself around every desk, every hallway. Claire carried the weight like an invisible coat. She kept minutes for meetings, but her pen pressed harder against the page. She scheduled calls, but her voice through the speaker was stripped of inflection. Her smile, once easy, had vanished. Graham noticed. Every time he opened his mouth to explain, she found a way to step aside. One morning, he stood near her desk, coffee in hand. "Claire, could we?" She didn't look up. "If it's about the board call, the documents are already uploaded." Her fingers kept typing. He hesitated. "No, please check your email." She slid the words out like a wall. He swallowed, nodded, and walked away. Inside her chest, Claire's thoughts spiraled. If he had been honest, if he had drawn a line with Elena, if he had cared about the people listening instead of making cryptic remarks, would I be here, feeling this small at her desk? She began funneling everything through email, memos, approvals, notes that could have been a 10-second conversation all written, stamped, distant. Even when he tapped lightly at her doorframe, she motioned without looking. Just send it. She told herself it was professionalism, that it kept boundaries clear, but in truth, it was armor. By midweek, the air in the office felt like brine, sharp, stinging, impossible to ignore. Staff whispered about the leaked clip, Some even printed the transcript, sliding it under office doors like contraband. The move has already been discussed. Claire saw the paper on her desk one morning. No sender, no note, just the words in bold, circled in pen. Her throat tightened. She folded it once, then again, before tucking it into her drawer. She didn't need the reminder. The words already echoed in her skull every time she tried to sleep. Graham noticed the copy on another table and felt the ground slip further beneath his feet. He wanted to tell them all that things weren't decided, that the clip was misleading, that Elena's presence didn't mean authority, but the more he thought about it, the less convincing the defense sounded, even to himself. So he worked later hours. He buried himself in spreadsheets and projections. He let his phone buzz unanswered. He avoided the staff lounge, and Claire mirrored him. She, too, stayed late, though she kept her door closed. She drafted emails instead of conversations, reports instead of questions. They lived parallel lives in the same building, divided by a wall neither dared to climb. Sometimes their paths crossed. Passing in the hallway, a brush of silence between them. In the elevator, standing side by side, yet worlds apart. She smelled the salt in the air from his cologne, but kept her eyes on the numbers glowing above the doors. He noticed the pen she always carried tucked behind her ear, the one with a crack in its cap. But he didn't say a word. Both of them thought the same thing. When did it get this hard? By Friday, the leak had taken on a life of its own. A draft document surfaced pages outlining relocation scenarios. It wasn't official, but it was damning enough. Someone slipped it into the internal drive, and within hours it spread through the building. Claire opened the file at her desk. She read the lines slowly, each word pulling her further into stillness. Cost saving, consolidation, closure of Monterey site. Her stomach dropped. Whether rumor or truth, the impact was the same. She closed the screen, hands trembling. That afternoon, Graham caught her glance across the boardroom. Their eyes met for a second, just one. He tried to send something through it, an apology, a plea. She broke the connection, flipping a page in her notebook. The silence between them stretched higher, heavier. And though no one said it aloud, the office itself seemed exhausted, as if waiting for a break that never came. Claire found it on a Tuesday evening. Her mailbox creaked as she pulled it open, expecting only the usual utility bills, circulars, a grocery coupon or two. Instead, a postcard lay on top. The front showed a photograph of Monterey's rugged shoreline, waves crashing against black rock, gulls suspended mid-flight. She turned it over. The handwriting stopped her breath for a second. Straight lines, careful spacing, not rushed, not careless. Graham Hawthorne. Her thumb pressed against the edge as her chest tightened. She read slowly. He admitted the words she already suspected. That control had always been his armor, forged in a world where losing it once had cost him dearly. That Elena's sudden reappearance had snapped him backward, not because he wanted her, but because old habits had flared the reflex to manage, to contain, to hide. There were no excuses in the note, no sweeping requests for forgiveness. Only a line that said he did not expect her to forget. Only hoped she would watch what he did next, that maybe action could carry the weight his words no longer could. Claire stood in her doorway, the evening air cool against her skin. She read the postcard twice, then a third time, the ink pressing deeper into her thoughts with each pass. Inside. Aunt May sat at the kitchen table, leafing through an old photo album. Claire placed the postcard beside her cup of tea. May traced the handwriting with one finger. Her memory faltered off in these days, but some wisdom slipped through like sunlight through clouds. A man who knows how to mend, she said softly. Maybe worth keeping around. Claire pressed her lips together, blinking fast. She didn't answer. The following morning at work, tension lingered, but something had shifted inside her. Not melted, not yet, but shifted. That afternoon, Graham approached carefully. Not with the commanding stride that usually carried him through the office, but slower, almost tentative. He asked if she might join him on an upcoming site visit, a fishing village south of Carmel, one of the communities under consideration for new funding. He explained why. The board needed more than numbers. They needed someone who knew the coast, who understood local voices. Claire, he said, was that person? She hesitated. Traveling with him felt dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. Yet the project itself mattered, and the community deserved someone who would listen. Finally, she nodded. Work is work, she said, her voice steady. That's all this will be. He didn't push. He accepted the boundary, his eyes quiet, his tone almost relieved. Over the next days, she prepared reports and background notes. She read about the village's history, the decline of sardine runs, the fragile hopes for sustainable tourism. She imagined the faces she would meet, the stories they might share. Graham, true to his word, stepped back. He let her structure the agenda, assign interviews, decide what data mattered. It surprised her. She had expected a fight, a tug over authority. Instead, he deferred. On the morning of departure, the two of them stood outside MCC's modest parking lot. The sky was pale, a thin fog hugging the hills. Graham carried a folder, but no laptop, a concession he must have struggled to make. Claire noticed, though she kept her thoughts to herself. As they drove down the winding coastal highway, silence filled the car, not heavy this time, but tentative, as if waiting for permission to breathe. Claire watched the cliffs rise and fall, the Pacific flashing silver through breaks in the fog. She thought again of the postcard tucked inside her bag. She hadn't shown anyone else. She hadn't even decided what it meant. But it was there, proof that perhaps control wasn't the only language Graham knew. When they arrived at the village, children played near the docks, their laughter mixing with the creak of ropes and the call of gulls. Fishermen in weather jackets hauled nets, their hands rough, their eyes tired, yet proud. The air smelled of brine and diesel, salt and wood smoke. Claire stepped forward, greeting the first elder who offered a handshake. She asked questions, listened, took notes carefully. People leaned toward her, sensing she wanted to hear, not just record. Graham stood back, watching. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. Once, she caught his gaze, and there was something in it, respect, maybe gratitude. She turned back quickly, heart skipping in spite of herself. That evening, they sat in a small cafe by the pier. Claire spread her notes across the table. Graham listened, nodding, asking only when she paused. The candlelight flickered, catching the strain in his features. For once, he seemed less like a man of answers, more like someone learning to follow. And in that moment, Claire wondered if May had been right. Maybe some people truly did know how to mend. The village smelled of damp wood and old rope. The docks stretched like tired arms into the bay, their planks worn smooth by decades of boots and salt. Boats bumped against each other with a hollow knock. Knock, knock. Their hulls rocking gently as gulls wheeled above. Claire opened her notebook and clicked her pen. The paper felt crisp under her hand, a small anchor in a place where everything smelled of history and survival. She and Graham had come to listen, not to present. That much had been clear from the start. The first meeting was with a fisherman whose weathered face spoke of long mornings at sea. His hands were thick with calluses, his voice rough like rope dragged across stone. He spoke of nets torn by floating trash, of seals tangled and stranded, of the cost of repairing what should never have been broken. Claire asked questions patiently. How often does this happen? What tools would help most? She leaned forward as he spoke, writing carefully, nodding with each detail. Graham stood back, arms crossed loosely, eyes on the man, but words left unspoken. For once, he wasn't leading. He was letting her shape the room. Next came the schoolteacher, her cardigan frayed at the cuffs, her voice tired but bright when she spoke of her students. She wanted science kits, simple STEM supplies, things that might spark a child's imagination. Claire's chest tightened as she wrote Aunt May had been a teacher once, long ago, before the memory gap stole her confidence. Do the children still come to the shore? Claire asked. Yes, the woman said. They ask why the water carries more plastic than fish some days. I want to give them answers that don't break their hearts. Claire swallowed, writing each word. Later, a volunteer who organized beach cleanups joined them. His shirt was sun-bleached, his hands stained with work. He told stories of hauling tires from the sand, of children who joined once and never came back, too discouraged by the endless tide of trash. By midday, Claire's pages were full, her handwriting tilted in different directions, hurried to keep pace with the voices that poured out. Through it all, Graham remained at the edge, watching. She sensed his presence like a steady line behind her shoulder, but he never interrupted. When the time came to draft a commitment, Claire spread her notes across a table in the small community hall. The room smelled faintly of fish stew and wood smoke. Chairs scraped against the floor as people gathered around. She spoke slowly, careful not to sound like a politician. "Here's what we can promise," she said, reading from the draft. Clear criteria for funding, transparent deadlines, a requirement for regular reporting, so you know exactly where the money goes. No surprises, no hidden clauses. Graham added only a few words. He affirmed her points, nodded when she looked his way, but let her lead. Something softened in the room. The fishermen leaned back in their chairs. The teacher smiled faintly. The volunteer crossed his arms, but his eyes warmed. For once, Claire felt she wasn't just a note-taker in someone else's meeting. She was part of a conversation that mattered. When the session ended, an old fisherman shuffled forward. His beard was silver, his jacket patched in too many places to count. He carried something in his hands. It was a paddle, chipped at the edges, its paint faded to pale blue. He held it out to her. "Take this," he said, voice low. "It's not much, but it reminds me what saved this breakwater years ago. Not money, not speeches, truth. Keep it so you remember." Claire blinked hard, her throat tight. She took the paddle gently, running her fingers over the worn wood. The weight of it was light, but the meaning pressed heavy against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Graham stood nearby, watching the exchange with quiet respect. He didn't step forward. He didn't make it about himself. On the drive back, Claire sat in the passenger seat with the paddle across her lap. The afternoon sun spilled gold across the cliffs, waves crashing far below. She traced the grain of the wood absent-mindedly, her heart softer than it had been in weeks. Something inside her had eased, not solved, not decided, but eased. She looked out at the horizon, the paddle resting against her hands, and felt a weight she hadn't realized she carried lift, just slightly. And for the first time since everything began, she let herself breathe without bracing for the worst. By the time they left the fishing village, the sun was already sinking low. The road glistened faintly, damp with salt spray carried in from the waves below. The car's headlights cut a pale path along the cliffs, glimmering on patches of mist. Claire sat with the old paddle resting across her knees. The wood smelled faintly of smoke and sea. She ran her fingers along the chipped edge, feeling the ridges, the places where time had worn it smooth. The ride was quiet at first, the kind of silence that wasn't hostile but wasn't yet comfortable either. Words hovered but didn't land. Half an hour later, Graham slowed the car near a clapboard shack with a sign that read, "Clam Chowder, best on the coast." He pulled over without asking. The windows glowed golden, the scent of broth drifting out each time the door opened. "I'll be a minute," he said simply. Claire watched as he disappeared inside, returning with 2 steaming paper bags. He placed one carefully in the back seat, then kept the other in his lap. But when they reached her neighborhood, he didn't hand it to her. Instead, he carried it up the porch steps of May's little house. He set it down just outside the door, beside the worn welcome mat. Then he slipped a folded scrap of paper under the lid. Claire followed, puzzled. She leaned down and read the note. Salt should be just enough. Her breath caught. It was nothing dramatic, nothing costly, just soup, and a few words written in an unsteady hand. Yet, somehow, it said more than all the explanations she had wanted from him before. For a moment she stood still, unsure if she should speak, But Graham only gave a small nod and turned back toward the car. Inside again. The air smelled faintly of chowder, rich and warm. The drive resumed, the road winding beneath them. At last, Claire broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. His voice was even. "That's why it matters." She looked at him from the corner of her eye, searching for irony. There was none. Just a man driving with both hands steady on the wheel. His profile softened by the dim light. The conversation edged toward work. Safer ground. Claire cleared her throat. "If we're going to keep working together, I need boundaries. Honest conversations, no evasions." He nodded. "Fair. And I need trust enough to move quickly when decisions can't wait. But I'll explain when it matters. No hiding." The words settled between them, not as a promise, but as a framework. Something practical. Something they could test. Claire exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening. All right. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't erasing what had been said, what had been seen. But it was a start. They drove on, the sound of tires against damp asphalt filling the quiet spaces. The coastline blurred into shadows, the sea a constant presence just beyond the guardrail. Claire's phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out and saw a message from an unfamiliar number. "Thank you for making him laugh with his eyes again." Nick. Her chest tightened. She stared at the words, the simple sincerity of them. Graham's nephew had noticed something she hadn't dared believe that. Maybe, despite the tension, something lighter had crept back into the man beside her. She slipped the phone back into her bag, her throat thick. Outside, the town lights grew closer, scattered gold against the dark. Windows glowed in small houses, reflections trembling on the wet pavement. Life continued in ordinary rhythms. Dinners served, radios playing, children calling out from porches. Claire held the paddle in one hand, the warmth of the soup in the other, and felt a strange, fragile balance inside. The pain of mistrust wasn't gone. The wariness still lived under her ribs. But, for the first time, she sensed the wall between them wasn't impenetrable. As the car rolled through streets lined with yellow lamps, she leaned her forehead against the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, tired, yet a little less guarded. She whispered to herself, too quietly for Graham to hear, "Maybe this is worth the next step." Monday morning began with headlines. The local paper, folded neatly on the reception desk, carried a story that spread through MCC before noon. Sources suggest Monterey Coast Conservancy may relocate to San Francisco. The article quoted unnamed board members and, in parentheses, Elena Carlisle's name. Staff crowded in small groups, whispering, scrolling on their phones. The words hit harder than any leaked memo. This wasn't just rumor anymore, it was public. Claire read the piece at her desk, the letters blurring as frustration pressed against her temples. She didn't need to see Elena's name in print to feel its weight. But there it was, tied to the fate of everything they had worked for. CFO Mark Ellis wasted no time. He circulated proposals with deeper cuts, entire programs marked for closure. Staff roles struck through in red. He presented it as survival, but the tone was surgical, void of care. His voice carried in the conference room. "If we want to move north, we can't afford this baggage." Claire clenched her pen so tightly her hand ached. These weren't numbers. These were people, teachers, volunteers, families who believed in the cause. Amid the storm, an unexpected offer landed on her desk. A letter from HR, formal and crisp promotion to coordinator of internal communications. It was a step up, recognition of her skill with words and organization. But it also meant leaving her role beside Graham, leaving the uneasy rhythm they had begun to find. She stared at the paper, torn between pride and loss. That afternoon, she found Graham pacing in his office, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, urgent. When he hung up, his expression was heavier than she had ever seen. "There's an offer," he said simply. "Federal level, a coastal sustainability project. Washington, D.C." Her stomach dropped. "You'd leave. It's complicated," he admitted. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the Pacific stretched endless and gray. It's an opportunity to scale the work, but it means leaving this place behind, leaving Monterey, leaving other things. The unspoken word lingered between them. They sat across from each other in silence. Her new role, his new horizon, choices that didn't fit neatly together. At last, she spoke. Maybe what we need is space, not an ending, just room to breathe. His jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. Space. The word cut in ways neither expected. Not goodbye, not final, but heavy enough to sting. That evening, Claire walked to the breakwater. The wind carried the cries of gulls, their wings cutting arcs against the fading sky. She wrapped her coat tighter, staring at the water slapping against stone. No one could say where tomorrow would place them, San Francisco, Washington, or still here, clinging to Monterey. She lifted her eyes to the horizon, the paddle from the village propped against her side at home, and let the ache settle where hope still quietly lived. The rain came softly at first, a mist rolling in from the bay. By evening, it had gathered into a steady drizzle, cloaking the breakwater in a silver veil. The stones gleamed slick and dark, the tide pushing in slow breaths against the wall. Claire stood at the edge, coat pulled tight, phone heavy in her hand. She typed one line and hit send before she could overthink it. If you're still in town, meet me here. She didn't know if he would come. Minutes stretched. The rain dampened her hair, curled it against her cheeks. She breathed in salt, wet stone, the faint tang of seaweed, and then, through the haze, a figure appeared. Graham. He walked with no umbrella, his suit jacket already plastered to his shoulders. His hair clung to his forehead, droplets sliding down his face. He stopped a few feet away, chest rising hard, as if he had run the last block. For a moment, neither spoke, only the sound of rain and gulls calling from the pier. Then Claire's voice broke the quiet. We keep circling the same silence. Maybe it's time we stop. Graham nodded slowly. His voice was low, roughened by the damp air. I was afraid of failing again, of letting people down, and of you seeing more of me than I could control. Her chest tightened, and I was proud. Too proud to admit that I wanted to believe you. Too scared of being the fool who trusts the wrong man. They stood there, truths unraveling like threads pulled from old cloth. Claire drew in a shaky breath. I accepted the promotion. Internal communications. If nothing else, I can make sure voices here are heard, not buried in board memos. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval. Maybe relief. That's exactly what they need. She lifted her gaze. NUDC? He shook his head. Rain streamed down his temple. I turned it down. Monterey is harder, smaller, messier. But this is where the promises matter, where the faces aren't just numbers. I couldn't walk away. Her lips parted, but no words came. A warmth spread through her chest, cutting through the chill. He stepped closer, his hand hidden behind his back. When he brought it forward, Claire gasped. The old paddle, but different now. The wood was sanded smooth, its chipped edges polished, and near the handle, 2 words had been carved, careful and deep. Stay true. He held it out, rain dripping down its surface. I thought it deserved better. So did you. Her hand shook as she touched the letters. The wood felt alive beneath her fingers, like a memory remade. She looked up, eyes burning. Why give it back? Because it was never about me, he said simply. It's about all of us choosing truth, even when it's hard. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the steady rhythm of the rain. Claire tightened her grip on the paddle, her other hand trembling at her side, and then Graham reached for it. Not the paddle, her hand. His fingers brushed hers gently, tentative. She let them, slowly, deliberately. She curled her hand into his. Their palms met, damp and cold, yet warmer than anything she had felt in weeks. They didn't define it, didn't call it love or partnership, or anything that might cage it too soon. Instead, they said it quietly between them. Honesty, patience, the promise to listen. Together, they began to walk down the breakwater, shoes splashing in shallow puddles, rain streaming over their joined hands. The storm wasn't fierce, it was soft, steady, cleansing. Claire tilted her head back, letting the drops hit her face. For once, she didn't care how she looked, didn't care who saw. The wall she had built between them was crumbling, piece by piece, washed down by the tide. And though they hadn't spoken the words, she felt the answer building inside her chest, steady and certain. It wasn't the end of their questions, it wasn't the end of fear, but it was the beginning of something that finally felt real. Months passed, and the air around MCC shifted like the tide after a storm. Meetings ran with more openness. Reports were shared with staff and community alike. The fear that had once poisoned the halls loosened its grip, replaced by a fragile kind of trust. On a Sunday morning, Claire stepped out of her small apartment and breathed in the salt air. The breeze was gentle, lifting the ends of her hair. From the restaurant down the block drifted the smell of lemon pie cooling on the sill. Sweetness mixed with sea brine, a combination that felt uniquely theirs, Monterey, stubborn and alive. May was doing better. The slips in her memory still came, but routines had steadied her. Claire visited daily, bringing small comforts, reading aloud from the same book again and again, never minding the repetitions. May's laughter, though softer than before, was still bright enough to fill a room. Nick had grown comfortable with Claire too. He showed her sketches of whales and sea otters, his pencil lines stronger now, his confidence blooming. He teased Graham sometimes, pointing out how Claire managed to make him laugh without even trying. That morning, Graham appeared at her door with something hidden behind his back. His smile was faintly mischievous, the kind of smile that reminded her of storms that ended in sunlight. "I built this," he said, revealing a wooden model ship. The hull was smooth, the sails crafted from scraps of linen, every detail carved with care. Claire took it carefully, marveling at the weight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Look inside," he said. She lifted the tiny cabin hatch. Tucked within, glinting in the soft light, lay a ring. Her breath caught. A wave of memory crashed over her, wind tearing at her skirt, her own voice yelling "pervert" on that first humiliating day. Now, here, months later, was the same man, offering not excuses, not grand speeches, but something steadier. He looked at her, eyes clear. "Life started messy with us. But if you'll let me, I want to keep choosing you, even in the mess." Claire's hands trembled. She thought of May's words, of Nick's sketches, of the paddle carved with "Stay True." She thought of the long road they had walked, silence, doubt, laughter, rain. "Yes," she said softly, almost a breath, then firmer. "Yes." The wedding was small, a wooden church by the shore, its white paint weathered by salt and sun. Friends and colleagues filled the pews, not in finery, but in clothes that felt real sweaters, jackets, scarves damp from fog. On the tables at the reception sat bowls of clam chowder, rich and steaming. Platters of lemon pie glistened under the lights. The decorations were simple postcards collected from the coast, strung together with twine, the old paddle resting near the altar, its letters gleaming. Nick carried the rings with solemn pride. May, wrapped in a shawl, whispered the vows along with them, her voice clear for once. When it was done, there were no fireworks, no orchestras, just applause, laughter, and the quiet strength of promises made among people who mattered. Later that evening, Claire and Graham walked the breakwater again. The sea stretched endless, gulls wheeling overhead, their hands were linked, the paddle's words echoing in her mind. They talked about nothing and everything, whether the chowder had been too salty, whether the pie should have had more lemon, whether Nick would ever outgrow drawing sea creatures, small things, ordinary things. But in those moments, ordinary felt like the rarest gift. Graham stopped, turning toward her. rain from earlier showers still glistening on the stones. He touched her cheek lightly, his hand warm. "We'll never have perfect days," he said, "but we can choose each other, every day." Her throat tightened. "That's all I want." They stood there as the tide rolled in, the sky soft with fading light. The world had not grown easier, but it had grown steadier, anchored in two hands joined against the wind. And when the storms came again, as storms always did, they both knew where they would lean, toward each other. The sea sparkled, restless and eternal, and for once Claire closed her eyes, certain she could trust its song. Life has a way of surprising us in the moments we least expect. For Claire and Graham, what began with humiliation and anger slowly unfolded into a journey of forgiveness, courage, and love. Their story reminds us that people are rarely just what we see on the surface. Behind mistakes, there are fears. Behind pride, there is often tenderness waiting to be uncovered. The true lesson is, this second chances are not only for the young. At any age, we are invited to choose again to listen more carefully, to forgive when it feels hard, and to trust when it feels risky. Relationships are not built on perfection, but on the daily decision to be honest and present. For many of us, past hurts and disappointments still weigh heavily. Yet, if we open our hearts, even a painful beginning can lead to something deeply meaningful. Love does not erase life's storms, but it gives us a hand to hold while walking through them. And sometimes, as Claire and Graham discovered, the greatest promise we can make is the simplest to choose each other, one day at a time. Thank you, dear friends, for spending your time with this story. If Claire and Graham's journey touched your heart, we invite you to keep walking with us. Please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story. Your support keeps these heartfelt tales alive, and we are grateful to have you here.